Hey guys, welcome to Through the Bible Verse by Verse, a plain and simple study of the entire Bible, book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse. We are in 2 Kings, chapter 12. We're going to try to get to 12 and 13. And this chapter is going to deal with Joash. He is going to be a good king. What is interesting about this king is, if you remember, the wicked Elisha killed all of the heirs of Joash. I'm going to bring up my chart here so that you can see how we are charting the kings here. So Elisha was again, and this is the king of Judah, remember. So Ahaziah, and then he is called also, Ahaziah was in, Jehoram was the son of Jehoshaphat. But Althea reigned only 6 years, and then she took the, so you know, when it says the grandson is the grandson of Jehoshaphat, and Jehoshaphat was a pretty good king. Now again, we'll get more in detail when we get to the Book of Chronicles. They're going to go more into detail there, but he is actually a good king. And the last time, if you remember, we studied through the priest Jehoiada and Jehoiada. And Jehoiada was a good priest, a godly priest, and as long as he was around, Joash was a good king. And then, but we won't get into it in detail here. We'll get into it more detail again when we get to Chronicles that will focus more on the kings of Judah. All right, here we go. Verse 1 says, in the seventh year of Jehu, Joash became king and reigned 40 years in Jerusalem. Now, keep in mind, he was 7 years old when he reigned. His mother's name was Zibiah, who was from Beersheba. Throughout the time of Jehoiada, the priest instructed him, Joash did what was right in the Lord's sight. Yet the high places were not taken away. The people continued sacrificing and burning incense on the high places. This was a continual plague, and we will see this all the way up into the Babylonian exile. Now remember, these high places were pagan worship. The idea was they were high elevated plains, okay? And the thought from the pagan, one of the thoughts for the pagan, is the higher up you get, the closer to the heavens, the closer to the deities. But they were places of stumbling blocks, because this shows you that even though he was a good king, he never stopped the pagan worship. Verse 4, then Joash said to the priests, all the dedicated money brought into the Lord's temple, census money from vows, and all of the money voluntary given for the Lord's temple, each priest is to take from his assessor and repair whatever damage to the temple is found. Now, what should be of note here is that the temple is in disrepair, disrepair. Which the priest's duty, which the money comes from the people. So the Lord's temple, again, just another sign of the time of just how wicked the nation had become. They just totally in other words, the temple was just not even being looked after. Verse 6, But by the 23rd year of the reign of King Joash, the priests had not repaired the damage to the temple. In other words, there was no accounting of the money. They were just taking the money. So King Joash called Jehoiada, the priest, and the other priests, and said, why haven't you repaired the temple damage? Since you don't take any money from your assessors. Instead, hand it over for the repair of the temple. So the priests agreed, and they would not take money from the people, and they would not repair the temple damage. Now, of course, in all of this time, no one seemed to notice that work wasn't being done, even Jehoiada. Then Jehoiada the priest took a chest, bore a hole in its lid, and he set it beside the altar on the right side as it enters the Lord's temple. In it, the priest who guarded the threshold put all of the money brought to the Lord's temple. Whenever they saw that there was a large amount of money in the chest, the king's secretary and the high priest would go to the Lord's temple and count the money found there and tie it up in bags. Then they would put the counted money into the hands of those doing the work, those who oversaw the Lord's temple, and they in turn would pay it out to those working on the Lord's temple, the carpenters, builders, masons, stone cutters, and would use it to buy timber, crawl stone, to repair the damage to the Lord's temple, for all the spending for the Lord's repair, for the temple's temple repairs. However, no silver bowls, wick trimmers, sprinkle basins, trumpets, or any article of gold or silver was made for the Lord's temple, for the money brought into the temple. Instead, it was given to those doing the work, and they repaired the Lord's temple with it. No accounting was required from the men who received the money to pay those doing the work, since they worked with integrity. And the money from the restitution offering and the sin offering was not brought to the Lord's temple, since it belonged to the priest. So they begin this repair. I guess they finally got some accounting what was done. In other words, the question is, what was happening to the money that they was collecting? And so when they put this kind of box with a hole in it, people would just put it in. And then when they would see that it was full, then they would take the money out, count it, and that way the work continued. Verse 17, at the time Hazael, king of Aram, marched up and fought against Gath and captured it. Then he planned to attack Jerusalem. So King Joash of Judah took all of the consecrated items that his ancestors, the king of Judah, Jehoshaphat, Jehoram, and Ahaziah, had consecrated, along with his own consecrated items, and all of the gold found in the treasuries of the Lord's temple and the king's palace, and he sent them to Hazael, king of Aram. Then Hazael withdrew from Jerusalem. Now we'll get into this later on. Again, it's at this time I think Jehoiada had died too. So you see a switch from Joash, and he gets into trouble with the Lord. Again, more detail when we get into Chronicles. The rest of the events of Joash's reign, along with all of his accomplishments, are written in historical records of Judah's kings. And Joash's servants conspired against him and killed him at Beth Milo, on the road that goes down to Silla. His servants Jehobad, son of Shemith, and Jehozabad, son of Shemar, struck him down, and he died. Then they buried him with his father in the city of David, and his son Amaziah became king in his place. Now, we will get more in detail with this. This assassination. Like I say, we're seeing a lot of what is called the politics of the kingdom here. Again, ruthless. It's bad. All right. Chapter 13. And then verse 1 says, in the 23rd year of Judah's king Joash, son of Ahaziah, Jehoahaz, son of Jehu, became king over Israel in Samaria and reigned 17 years. He did what was evil in the Lord's sight and followed the sins of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, and that caused Israel to sin. He did not turn away from them. So the Lord's anger burned against Israel. He surrendered them to Hazael, king of Aram, and his son Ben-Hadad during their reign. Now, you remember this was the prophecy. Elijah, the prophet that prophesied even to the point where he actually cried. Verse 4, then Jehoash sought the Lord's favor, and the Lord heard him, for he saw the oppression of the king of Aram inflicted. I'm sorry, let me go back and read that. Then Jehoash sought the Lord's favor, and the Lord heard him, and he saw, meaning the Lord, he saw the oppression the king of Aram inflicted on Israel. Now, you remember, this was a very brutal affliction, which the Lord had saw in the king of Aram. And remember at the time, too, Elijah looked at him, right, and said, you're going to be king. The Lord had said you're going to be king of Aram. And then he looked at him. He looked at him so much to the point where the guy says, what? He goes, and then Elijah started crying, and then he said, what? He said, because the Lord has just shown me how much evil you're going to do. He goes, what, me? What? Which is kind of amazing, because what if the Lord had told you something like that? Somebody came and told you, a true prophet, that is. Man, you're one of the most evilest person that ever, could you believe it? But here it is. He was. Verse 5. Now, also note, he says, then Jehoash sought the Lord's favor, and the Lord heard him. God is merciful, and as I said before, one of them, when he's known as the God of wrath, the God of the Old Testament wrath, that is a total misrepresentation of the character. I'm going to say slander, because every single time when people seek the favor of God, the mercy of God, even Ahab, wicked Ahab, we're going to see when Manasseh, even wicked Manasseh, and we're going to get to him, but when he seeks, God will have mercy. Verse 5, therefore the Lord gave Israel a deliverer, and they escaped from the power of the Arameans. Then the people of Israel dwelt in their tents as before, but didn't turn away from the sin of the house of Jeroboam that had caused Israel to commit. And Jehoash walked in them, and the Asherah poles also remained standing in Samaria. Sad, because they sought God's favor but didn't turn away. Now remember, this sin was when Jeroboam built 2 golden calves. You go all the way back to Moses' day. They built this golden calf and said, this is the God that brought us out of Israel, and this is the God that's going to take us back. This golden calf that they made. Jeroboam came along and built 2 golden calves. Verse 7, Jehoash did not have an army left except for 50 horsemen, 10 chariots, and 10,000 foot soldiers, because the king of Aram had destroyed them, making them like dust at threshing. The rest of the events of Jehoahaz's reign, along with all his accomplishments and his might, are written in historical records of Israel's king. Jehoash rested with his fathers, and he was buried in Samaria, and his son Jehoash became king in his place. In the 37th year of the king of Judah's king Jehoash, son of Jehoahaz, became king over Israel and Samaria and reigned 16 years. He did what was evil in the Lord's sight. He did not turn away from all of the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, had caused Israel to commit, but he walked in them. Now, what is interesting about this time is I'm thinking about a familiar phrase that people say today. Well, hey, we live in the day everybody was doing it. That is not a good phrase. Verse 12. The rest of the events of Jehoash's reign, along with all of his accomplishments and the power he had to wage war against Judah's king Amaziah, are written in historical records of kings Israel. And Jehoash rested with his father, and Jeroboam sat on his throne, and Jehoash was buried in Samaria with the king of Israel. Now it says, now verse 14. Now when Elisha became sick with the illness that he would die from, okay, right. Joash, king of Israel, went down to weep over him and said, my father, the chariots and horsemen of Israel. Popular phrase, right? Elijah responded and says, take a bow and arrow. So he got a bow and an arrow. Then Elijah said to the king of Israel, put your hand on the bow. So the king put his hand on it. Then Elijah put his hands on the king's hands. And Elijah says, open the east windows. So he opened it. Elijah said, shoot. So he shot. Then Elijah said, the Lord's arrow of victory. Yes, the arrow of victory over Aram. You are to strike down the Arameans at Apex until you have put an end to them. Keep this phrase in mind here. He says you are to strike down the Arameans at Apex until you have put an end to them. I want you to keep that phrase right there. Verse 18. Then Elijah says, take the arrow. So he took them. Then Elijah said to the king of Israel, strike the ground. So he struck the ground 3 times and stopped him. And God was angry with him and said, you should have struck the ground 5 or 6 times. Then you would have struck down Aram until you had put an end to them. But now you will only struck down Aram 3 times. Then Elijah died and was buried. Now, I oftentimes used to wonder about this and go, how would he have known? And I think the clue is right here in verse 17 when he said, you will strike down the Aram and Apex until you have put an end to them. So maybe I'm saying he probably should have took a clue from that and just kind of struck it. At any rate, this became a prophetic symbol here that he would only defeat Aram 3 times instead of putting a complete end to him. So Elisha died, and then we see he was buried. Now we're going to see a later story about him that is again amazing. It says, now Moabite raiders used to come into the land in the spring of the year. Once, as Israelites were burying a man, suddenly they saw a raiding party, so they threw the man into Elisha's tomb, and when he touched Elijah's bone, the man revived and stood up. So this is kind of a miracle right here, right? Being kind of buried, but instead of burying him, they threw him into the tomb so they could run, but the man came alive. Quite a miracle here, right? Verse 22. Hazael, king of Aram, oppressed Israel throughout the reign of Jehoahaz, but the Lord was gracious to them, had compassion on them, and turned toward them because of his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He was not willing to destroy them. Even now, he has not banished them from his presence. And the king Hazael of Aram died, and the son Ben-Hadad became king in his place. Then Jehoash, son of Jehoahaz, that was Z, took back from Ben-Hadad, son of Hazael, the cities that Hazael had taken in war from Jehoahaz's father and Jehoahaz. Joash defeated Ben-Hadad 3 times and recovered the city of Israel. Now this was, remember, he should have struck more, but he only struck 3 times. Interesting, Elijah's death, though. You know, Elijah's death. And then after Elijah's death, okay, when the man's bones. Now, let me just say this. This was a testament to God's power, not any kind of leftover residue. Now, I say that because of some of you would remember in the 80s, the movies, The Lost, what was it called? Lost Ark or something like that. I can't remember the name. And Harrison Ford played in it, and he got, you know, and they found the Ark of the Covenant. And then the Ark of the Covenant had power in it. No. All of this was very simply God's power, and that's it. So the glory is to look to God's power, not to the bones. The bones in themselves do not have power in them. Okay, don't forget to like and share this video, guys. And subscribe to BP, the Bible Perspective, and hit the subscribe button, and welcome all of your comments. I'll see you in the next chapter.